There's a particular kind of confidence that almost deserves formal recognition, not because it's wise, and certainly not because it is likely to end well, but because it arrives so fully formed, so free of hesitation that you cannot help but admire the commitment, even while you brace for the consequences. Tonight's example comes to us from a courtroom. A man stands before a judge with a bond set at $250. It's a manageable number, a solvable problem, and he reaches into his belongings, produces three $100 bills, hands them over, and in effect says, "Keep the change." Now, that is not everyday confidence. This is a man behaving as though the universe has finally decided to be reasonable. It had not. Because the judge, in one of those regrettable outbreaks of competence that can ruin a whole afternoon, took a closer look. The color was a little bit off, and the texture was not encouraging, and the writing on the bills, well, it was not in English. So a quick test confirmed the obvious. The money was counterfeit. So in one smooth move, a memorable motion, this gentleman managed to turn a routine payment into fresh evidence, which I have to say is an impressively creative misuse of currency. And perhaps this is our lesson for the evening. Sometimes the distance between boldness and disaster is simply the moment someone decides to inspect the details. Welcome to the Daily Dozen. I'm Sunny from Nite Muse Media. These are 12 developments from around the world, and occasionally from those edges of the conversation where science, culture, mystery, human absurdity all seem to meet in the dark and compare notes. Some stories tonight are solidly grounded, and some are a little unusual. A few live in that familiar territory where the facts are incomplete, the questions are good, and the temptation to get carried away must be resisted like a second dessert at a church potluck. That's part of the pleasure of this kind of a program. We're not here to panic, preach, or pretend that every mystery can be solved between the intro music and the weather. We're here to pay attention, to ask better questions, and whenever possible, to enjoy the fact that the world still contains these things capable of surprising us. Let's begin. We begin tonight with one of those reports that spent years in the category of interesting if true, which is often where genuine phenomena get parked until enough data arrives to embarrass the skeptics. For generations, people in earthquake-prone regions, they describe something strange appearing shortly before seismic events, lights near the horizon, flashes over ridgelines, odd glows that do not behave like lightning, and they do not linger like aircraft. So you might have blue, white, sometimes flickering, often steady, always brief enough to leave witnesses sounding either sincere or unwell, depending on who's listening. For a long time, reports like these were just brushed aside for a simple reason. They did not fit neatly into respectable categories. And when an observation refuses to fit the filing cabinet usually wins. But over time, patterns begin to emerge. Similar accounts appeared in areas that later experienced seismic activity, and that raised a more useful question. Not did people imagine this, but what physical process might create it? One leading explanation involves pressure inside the earth itself. Certain rocks, when subjected to intense stress, can generate electrical charges. Under the right conditions, those charges may travel upward through fractures in the ground and interact with the air near the surface. If enough ionization occurs, visible light may appear. So what people may have seen was not folklore in the usual sense, but geology briefly showing its hand. Now, to be fair, this is not a reliable warning system. These lights do not appear before every earthquake, and scientists still debate the precise mechanics. But the larger point is worth sitting with. The planet may sometimes signal distress in ways we do not yet fully understand. And that is often how nature works. It does not always hide the truth from us. Sometimes it presents the truth plainly enough, but in a language we have not learned to read. From strange lights before the ground shifts, we move to something rather more cheerful. The enduring ability of a treasure hunt to turn ordinary adults into amateur cryptographers with muddy shoes and very strong opinions about downtown statues. There's a small town in Ohio that has become a destination not because a major attraction was built there, but because something valuable was hidden there. A treasure. Not symbolic treasure, not the real prize is community engagement. Actual valuables. Gold, cash, and other items reportedly worth tens of thousands of dollars concealed somewhere in or around the town, waiting for the right person to find them. But naturally, it's not that simple. Clues have been released in fragments, so you have riddles and hints, suggestive details, pieces of information that do not merely inform, but test whether anyone is paying close enough attention. And unlike many puzzles that can be worked from the sofa with a laptop and an unhealthy amount of coffee, this one requires something more inconvenient, and therefore it makes it more interesting. You have to physically go there. You have to walk the streets, observe the landmarks, get a feel for the place, and understand that the town is not just a backdrop. It is part of the puzzle itself. That changes everything. Because once a mystery occupies physical space, it stops being passive entertainment and becomes an experience. People travel. They queue up. They compare notes with strangers. They study architecture, signage, local history, patterns they might otherwise never have noticed. Businesses benefit. Curiosity becomes foot traffic, and foot traffic becomes commerce. The money is part of the appeal, of course, but perhaps the deeper draw is older than that. People want to believe there is still something hidden in plain sight that can be found not merely through luck, but through attention, through patience, through being the person who notices what everyone else just passed by. And that is a very powerful idea in a world that rarely rewards close observation. From hidden treasure to something humbling, the possibility that forests have been conducting their own quiet exchanges all along while we marched through them, assuming we were the only intelligent life present. We often speak of forests as quiet places, peaceful and still, a refuge from noise, distraction, and the modern habit of turning every spare second into a performance. But silence, it turns out, may not be the right word. Researchers have found that trees under stress can emit ultrasonic sounds, signals too high for human hearing, but detectable with specialized equipment. And these may take the form of clicks or pulses, often associated with drought, physical damage, or internal strain. The mechanism appears to involve cavitation inside the plant. Tiny bubbles form, and then they collapse within water-conducting tissue. It sounds technical because it is technical, but the result is surprisingly vivid. A stressed plant may be producing measurable acoustic signals, even though the human ear remains blissfully unaware of the conversation. That would already be interesting, but the larger question is what those signals mean in a living forest shared by other plants and organisms. There's growing evidence that nearby plants may respond to changes in their environment and to stress cues from surrounding vegetation, adjusting water usage or other behavior. Scientists are still sorting out how much of this is driven by sound, chemistry, root interaction, or some mixture of all three. So it is wise not to leap from research paper to fairy tale without pausing at the gate. Still, the broader insight remains. A forest is not passive scenery. It is responsive, dynamic. It's busy with forms of exchange that we do not naturally perceive. So when the woods seem quiet, that may say more about the limits of our hearing than the limits of the forest itself. Some places are alive in frequencies we were never built to notice. And speaking of signals that can be measured without necessarily meaning what they appear to mean, we come now to one of those modern frauds of our time, the machine-generated illusion of popularity. A man recently pleaded guilty in a scheme involving millions of dollars generated from music that, in any meaningful human sense, almost no one was actually listening to. Using automation and AI-assisted production, he created an enormous number of tracks. And then, through a network of bots, those tracks were streamed continuously. The platforms registered activity, and the activity generated revenue, and the money flowed. You may have even listened to one of them. There's something darkly elegant about the scam because it exposed a weakness at the heart of many digital systems. They are often far better at counting behavior than understanding the intention. And isn't life really all about intention? A streaming platform can track plays, completion rates, device activity, and all sorts of statistical traces. What it cannot easily detect is sincerity. It cannot distinguish between a listener genuinely moved by a song at 2 in the morning and a synthetic army of fake accounts imitating enthusiasm at industrial scale. It matters because streaming revenue often comes from shared pools, which means fraudulent streams do not merely create money from nowhere, they divert money away from real artists whose work is actually reaching real audiences. So this was not just a technical exploit, it was an economic distortion, a counterfeit audience, extracting value from actual creators. And perhaps the most revealing part is that the system did not so much fail as behave exactly as it was designed to behave. It saw activity, counted activity, and rewarded activity. And the trouble is that activity is not the same as meaning. And increasingly, this is one of the great problems of our time, not simply whether something can be measured, but whether what is being measured corresponds to anything human at all. Now, let us turn to a subject many people place in the category of chores, which is unfortunate because the body has a habit of treating small neglected chores as long-term strategic mistakes. We tend to think of oral health as a separate matter, something cosmetic, local, perhaps slightly annoying, a dental issue over here, a medical issue over there, and the assumption that the two maintain polite distances. But the body does not organize itself that way. Increasingly, research suggests that the condition of your teeth and gums can reflect much larger processes at work inside the body. Tooth loss, severe gum disease, and chronic oral inflammation have been associated with higher risks for a range of systemic problems, including cardiovascular issues and stroke. Now, that does not mean a bad tooth causes a stroke in the simple storybook sense. Biology is rarely that theatrical, but inflammation is important. When gum tissue becomes diseased, it can create pathways for bacteria to enter the bloodstream. Once there, those bacteria and inflammatory responses are no longer confined to the mouth. They travel. They interact with blood vessels. They contribute to a larger pattern of stress inside the system, which makes ordinary habits look rather less ordinary. You're brushing, flossing, paying attention to what feels minor until it becomes expensive and memorable. It is not glamorous advice. Nobody ever leaned in across a candlelit dinner table and whispered, "Tell me more about preventative gum care." But the body tends to reward boring wisdom more faithfully than dramatic rescue. And perhaps that is the point. Many of the largest outcomes in life are shaped quietly by routines that do not feel important enough to brag about, until they are. From medicine, we move to memory. And from memory to one of those subjects that hovers at the border between archaeology, catastrophe, and the internal human hope that somebody somewhere once knew what they were doing. Off the coast of various parts of the world, divers and researchers continue to investigate submerged structures and formations that raise a familiar and irresistible question: are we looking at the remains of lost human settlements or nature building shapes that tempt us into storytelling? It is an old argument and a good one. The sea is a gifted editor. Coastlines shift and water levels rise and fall. Earthquakes alter the land. Entire stretches of what once may have been habitable ground now rest beneath the surface, and with them the possibility that traces of earlier human life remain hidden underwater, not lost in fantasy, but buried in geology. That is one reason submerged ruins and walls, stone alignments, and anomalous formations generate such fascination. They allow two appetites to meet at once: the scientific desire to investigate and the imaginative desire to recover a forgotten chapter of ourselves. Of course, caution is essential here. Not every straight line on the seafloor is a road to Atlantis, and humanity has an unfortunate tendency to discover one intriguing stone and immediately declare a vanished civilization with excellent masonry. Still, underwater archaeology continues to produce remarkable findings around the world, including unearthing evidence of ancient settlements in areas that are now submerged by post-Ice Age sea level rise, and that alone should expand our sense of what remains to be found. The deep does not merely hide shipwrecks and fish with disappointing faces. It may also hold erased margins of human history waiting for the patient kind of curiosity that uses sonar, sampling, and restraint. Not every mystery underwater is a legend, but legends often begin where evidence has not yet caught up. And since we have ventured into old mysteries, let us take one step further into the sky where humanity has spent generations reporting unusual things and then arguing endlessly over whether the unusual part was the object itself or the fact that officials finally acknowledged seeing it too. In any field that lives between public fascination and official discomfort, a few people end up serving as translators, not because they possess every answer, but because they are willing to ask serious questions in a room where seriousness itself has often been rationed. Now, Nick Pope has long occupied that role. Many people first came to know him through his connection to the British Ministry of Defense and his work related to UFO reports and unexplained aerial phenomena. Over time, he became one of the better-known public voices, arguing that not every extraordinary claim deserves belief, but neither does every strange report deserve ridicule. And that distinction was so important, more than it may seem. For years, discussion of this subject was trapped between two equally unhelpful extremes. One side, reflexive dismissal; on the other, breathless certainty. One camp rolled its eyes and the other surrendered its standards, and neither contributed much to the genuine understanding. What voices like Pope's helped preserve was a middle ground, a way of saying that a person can be curious without becoming gullible and skeptical without becoming smug, that military reports, radar incidents, pilot testimony, and reoccurring patterns of unexplained observation can be examined seriously even when the conclusions remain incomplete. And now, of course, the broader subject has moved into different cultural space entirely. Governments have acknowledged investigations, and military witnesses have spoken publicly. Hearings have taken place. Language that once lived on the fringe now appears in mainstream reporting and policy conversations. Whether one agrees with every case, every interpretation, or every appearance is not really the central point. Sometimes the most important contribution a person can make is not solving the mystery. It is protecting the possibility of discussing the mystery honestly. And in a world where the unexplained is too often either mocked into silence or inflated into spectacle, that's no small service. And there is value in remembering the people who helped make a more serious conversation possible. Thank you, Nick Pope. Now from the skies back down to earth, though not necessarily to certainty, because the next story concerns one of the stranger developments in modern science, the increasingly awkward delivery that animals may understand more than we once found convenient. For a long time, human beings maintained a fairly flattering arrangement with themselves. We were the thinkers, the planners, the language users, the symbolic creatures. Everything else was instinct, reflex, some appetite, and decoration. Science has steadily been ruining that arrangement. Research across multiple species continues to reveal levels of memory, problem-solving, social awareness, and communication that complicate our old hierarchy. Crows can solve multiple-step problems and remember human faces. Octopus displays startling behavioral flexibility. Elephants, those sweet, wonderful, beautiful elephants, appear capable of grief-like responses and social recognition over long periods. Even animals we once regarded as simple are proving less simple the longer we study them. This does not mean every creature is secretly writing philosophy in the bushes, but it does mean that intelligence may be distributed across life in more varied forms than our habits of language once allowed us to recognize. And that should alter not only how we study animals, but how we speak about them, because one of the subtler forms of arrogance is assuming that if another mind does not resemble our own, it must be lesser rather than different. Nature rarely rewards that kind of certainty, and perhaps the most humbling possibility is this. We may not be discovering that animals are becoming more intelligent. We may simply be becoming slightly less dense in the way we observe them, which, to be fair, is still progress. From intelligence in the natural world to intelligence of a more manufactured kind, and all the practical unease that follows whenever we create a tool powerful enough to save time and complicated enough to make us nervous. Artificial intelligence has now advanced to the point where many people encounter it not as a distant concept, but as a daily presence. Writing emails, sorting information, generating images, assisting with research, drafting your plans, answering questions, and occasionally producing something so confidently wrong that it feels almost insulted to be corrected. That mix of usefulness and unreliability is precisely why the conversation matters. AI systems can be enormously helpful. They can reduce repetitive work, and they can speed up analysis, expand access to tools once reserved for specialists, and help individuals create things that would otherwise remain out of reach. Used well, they are amplifiers. But amplifiers increase everything, including errors, including the temptation to let fluent output stand in for actual judgment. That is where the human role becomes more important, not less. When you watch the news, doesn't everyone sound the same now? It's because everybody's using AI to write their scripts, the same cadence, the same language. A machine can assist with form. It can summarize, recombine, predict, and simulate. What it cannot reliably replace is wisdom, responsibility, discernment, and the moral weight of deciding what ought to be said, believed, built, or acted upon. In other words, the technology is not the end of thinking. It is the beginning of needing better thinkers. And that may be the real test before us. Not whether our machines become impressive, but whether our standards keep pace with their convenience. Because history suggests that humanity loves a shortcut right up until the shortcut begins making decisions on its own. Let us step for a moment into older territory, dust, stones, symbols, and the recurring suspicion that our ancestors may have been rather more observant than modern people tend to credit between software updates. Ancient structures around the world continue to provoke a particular kind of fascination, especially when their alignments appear to correspond with celestial events. Solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, star risings, and the turning of seasons. This often invites two opposite mistakes. The first is to dismiss such alignments as coincidence, as though ancient builders were incapable of careful observation. The second is to leap immediately into fantasy and declare alien architects the moment a stone points in an interesting direction. The truth is both less sensational and in many ways more impressive. Human beings have always watched the sky. Long before modern instruments, people tracked the heavens for survival, ritual, agriculture, navigation, and meaning. The movements of the sun and moon and stars structured time itself. To notice those patterns was not a hobby, it was a necessity. So when archaeologists find evidence that ancient sites were built with astronomical awareness, that should not diminish our view of the past, it should elevate it. It reminds us that intelligence is not owned by the present. Precision did not begin with satellites, and perhaps that is why these places still move us. They're reminders that people long gone were not living in some dim prelude to our brilliance. They were paying attention to the same sky, asking many of the same questions, and leaving behind evidence that wonder and discipline have always belonged together, which is a useful thing to remember in an age that often confuses novelty with superiority. And before we close, one more turn into the odd corners of human record, where official documents, witness testimony, and public memory all sit together at the table, looking mildly uncomfortable. There's something uniquely compelling about a sealed file, a classified memo, or a government document that survives just long enough to suggest that somebody somewhere thought a strange event was worth writing down, not proving, endorsing, just recording. Because bureaucracy, for all its faults, rarely takes the time to document what it considers entirely meaningless. If pilots, military personnel, intelligence agencies, or civil authorities repeatedly note unusual encounters, objects, anomalies, or unexplained observations, then at the very least, We are dealing with a category of event that someone in an official position considered real enough to enter it into record. Now, a record is not a revelation. A memo is not a solved mystery, and governments can misinterpret, exaggerate, conceal, or simply become confused like anyone else wearing sensible shoes. But documents have a stubborn quality. They outlast ridicule. They survive the shifting moods of public opinion. They wait in archives until some later generation, armed with more context and perhaps slightly better manners, returns to look again. And when that happens, what once seemed ridiculous can begin to look merely unresolved. And that's a distinction. Not everything hidden is profound. Some things are hidden because they're dull. They could be embarrassing or just very poorly organized. Anyone who has dealt with paperwork knows this, but now and then the survival of a file suggests that uncertainty itself has a history, and that may be one reason the unexplained never quite disappears. It leaves paperwork behind. And after counterfeit money, a restless earth, speaking forests, buried treasure, machine-made music, old stones, official files, the possibility that the natural world is brighter and stranger than our categories allow, it seems only fair to end somewhere simple, which is not the same as small at all. After everything we have covered tonight, the strange, the unresolved, technical, improbable, it's worth returning to something easy to overlook precisely because it does not announce itself. Nature. Not as a slogan, nor a decorative screensaver, not as one more thing people put on the tote bags and then ignore, but as a measurable influence on the human mind and body. Study after study suggests that time in green spaces can lower heart rate, reduce blood pressure, and improve your attention. Exposure to natural environments appears to help restore cognitive function, especially after mental fatigue. Birdsong has been associated with improved mood and focus. The scent compounds released by trees have been linked in some research to the reduction in stress markers. Even contact with soil and natural microbial environments may influence emotional well-being in ways scientists are still working to understand. Not every claim in this area is equally strong, and one should resist the modern temptation to turn every walk outdoors into a miracle cure with a marketing department. Still, the broader pattern is consistent. The body responds to the natural world because, literally, we are part of it. We have taken ourselves out of the natural world. Perhaps that is what makes it so easy to neglect. We are drawn to the spectacular, the breakthrough, the revelation, the headline that promises transformation by Thursday. Take this pill, try this injection. Some of the most restorative things available to us ask so little that we mistake them for background. Step outside, look at the trees. Listen for the wind and notice the birds. Let your mind stop performing for a little while, because sometimes what we need is not hidden at all. It has simply been waiting with remarkable patience for us to remember that we belong to a world larger than our schedules. This is where we leave it tonight. 12 developments, a few open questions, several reminders that the world is more layered than it first appears, and at least one man who discovered far too late that counterfeit generosity is still counterfeit. Thank you for spending part of your evening here with me. This has been Sunny with the Daily Dozen from Nite Muse Media, where the world remains stranger than expected, the questions remain worth asking, and the night is still a fine time to think. Follow the signal. Question the noise, and I'll see you again on the night side.